Welcome to the Power of Oxygen First, where we scale your life first so your business can actually breathe. I'm your host, Dot Rock. Oxygen First means you protect your energy first. You build your life first. You take care of your nervous system first. Then you scale. Because success without oxygen, that's just burnout with better branding. Around here, we talk about real leadership, how to hire your peanut butter instead of just doing it all yourself, how to fire with grace when something's expired, no more breadcrumbs, how to grow or go, and how to receive support without apologizing for it. This isn't hustle culture. It's sustainable success. It's leadership with oxygen. So let's pause and take a deep breath. Let's build something that actually feels like home. Well, hello, my podcast friends. Welcome back to the Power of Oxygen First. Today, we're going to dive on in to some of the hardest leadership questions that I see so many businesses that I work with and clients, and even just friends who own businesses or even work in corporate. The question is, should I hire or should I fire? And honestly, sometimes the answer is both. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I am coming to you recording this podcast right now after a really interesting and hard 2 days, which I'll record another podcast about, but I had already prepared this one. But I don't want to record and not be totally transparent because I think my authenticity and transparency is a big part of who I am on this podcast and who I am in this world. So, um, my son broke his arm last night at baseball throwing the ball. Simple, routine throw. He wasn't pitching, he wasn't catching. He is a pitcher and he is a catcher. He gets a lot of reps in, you guys. He's a strong little 13-year-old boy, and there is something that happened. I think it's called a thrower's fracture, and all the torque involved can cause the humerus to break off of, at the growth plate, break off of kind of where it connects to the elbow. It was a really hard night. It was a really hard day today that followed. Thank goodness he didn't end up having to have surgery. But you guys, my heart is just a little bit fragile and a little bit heavy. It's really hard to see something so important to my son. It's such a big part of our lives be taken from him. And I've been doing a lot of reframes with him and with myself, and even saying that out loud to you, taken from him. I think it's just the shock that we're in right now, the sudden surprise. And we feel so blessed. At first, they said it was far worse, that he would need a Tommy John surgery, which is really big in baseball. They said that he would never play baseball again. That's what the urgent care doctor said, which is really upsetting now to think about that he said that. It's interesting though, because when I face these challenges, watch workplaces, watch doctor's office, I watch how people interact, and I immediately go to my higher fire brain, to my systems brain, and I think about how things could be done differently and done better. I'm always looking for small tweaks, right? So I will record a whole podcast on baseball season, and being a parent to a little baseball player and how to run a business through that. And I'll just say my business went to bare bones today. I took care of the few fires with clients that I needed to. I had a pretty busy day this morning that I was supposed to do, but I work for myself, and that's the beauty of it. So here I am. I'm going to record the podcast that I had planned. But I think one of the first thoughts last night, as I was sitting there in urgent care, and then we got sent to the ER, and then they said we are going to have surgery last night, which we didn't, which I think is some kind of bold miracle that happened. But I thought that the way that that urgent care doctor, who was very kind, handled himself and gave us too much information too early on was kind of an inappropriate employee move. And it made me think a lot about the topic that we're talking about today. And that topic is all about the energy that people bring to your company, bring to the business, bring to the table, and how it impacts everyone around. So the question is, should I hire or should I fire? I find so many people struggle with this because they always think hiring more is going to, get more done. The goal to hiring is to make more money, to improve the bottom line. It's not just to have more expenses. It's not just to get more done. It is actually to make more money and to have more profit in a business. And one way to make more money is to fire people, let them go, get rid of people. And another way to make money is to hire people and increase productivity and increase certain KPIs, right? And the same is true in our personal lives. It's not just about business. But when we talk about should I hire or should I fire, honestly, sometimes the answer is actually both. Because sometimes we think more support is what we need, when what we actually have is a true energy leak that drains our entire businesses. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but it's very true. If I look back in my career, I think the terminations and the forced resignations that I have helped clients through have probably created a more dramatic impact in the workplace than hiring new energy. Both both are effective, but it's not always that you need to hire. Sometimes you've got to release what no longer serves you. And if you've ever had a team member, a contractor, a business partner, and honestly, any relationship, personal relationship, where everyone keeps adjusting to one person's chaos, you kind of will understand what I mean when I talk about sometimes the answer is to fire. Sometimes the answer is to release that leak. So today, I really do want to dive into this and talk about energy leaks and what they look like in business, why leaders stay stuck in them for so long, how I help guide companies through what I call grow or go conversations, meaning this is your opportunity to give feedback and people will either grow or they will go. And also why the right support can create oxygen in your business and in your life instead of more overwhelm. So recently, I worked with a client that I really enjoy working with. We have a fairly large company. And when I say that, there's a fairly large number of employees to the number of management team members, right? So they're managing a lot. So there's a lot of workers on the ground. And in particular, they had an employee that on paper, he looked pretty amazing. He also like didn't fit the mold of a lot of the other employees, so he looked like he was some kind of a catch. Sort of like when your girlfriend's dating that super attractive, tall, dark, handsome guy, and you just think, huh, that's an interesting fit. It was like that. But this guy also was paid particularly high salary compared to his peers in the organization. And he was always busy. I tell you what, every time I visited this client site, and I don't always visit a lot of client sites, this happens to be one that I would go to in person. But he was always talking about how overwhelmed they were, how underpaid they were, how they should get overtime. I'm telling you, this guy was pretty high paid salaried employee. But he was always acting like the company desperately needed him. But I've seen this before. Underneath that, critical errors were happening, deadlines were shifting, they were always slipping, and communication was just breaking down. And the rest of the team was constantly compensating for him and kind of walking on eggshells based on the environment he created. And also, it kind of disabled their ability to do work and make decisions. They like always relied on him. So, what I'm saying is the entire business had adapted around that dysfunction. And that's the part leaders often miss. They finally came to me and said, like, he's too overpaid, he's got performance issues, what do we do? Which I hate when we've got emergencies like that. We should be providing consistent feedback to employees. But when we don't, I have a little framework that I do to help an employee either see that they don't fit, resign, or we eventually terminate, right? But sometimes businesses just have slowly shaped themselves around one person's lack of accountability. And everyone starts overfunctioning. Everyone starts double checking the work. Everyone is emotionally managing them, walking on those eggshells, picking up the slack. And eventually, that person becomes exhausted trying to hold it together, and you start seeing even more issues. And then their manager becomes exhausted trying to hold it all together. It honestly reminds me a lot of emotionally unhealthy personal relationships. You know, those relationships where someone makes you feel like you desperately need them, but once they're gone, you realize how much smaller you had become trying to manage their chaos. So that same thing is what's happening here. Obviously, I have experienced that in personal relationships. I've talked a lot about that on the podcast. That freedom that I felt after no longer walking on those eggshells, after no longer managing someone's chaos. But this happens a lot in businesses and in small to mid-sized businesses. Even one person in a team of four can make a huge energetic impact. In fact, they can make a bigger impact in a team like that than a team of 1 to 25, right? But we all know what toxic employees look like, what toxic coworkers look like. They're so similar to what they looked like back in college, back in high school, back even in middle school when we had to work on group projects. And that one person acted like they were doing so much, but they weren't doing anything, and they were letting you do everything. So that's really what I'm talking about here. So the business owner and the top leader couldn't fully see that yet because they had normalized the dysfunction. Now, my skill set is to see these issues, to pick up on them, to pick up on the way employees interact, and I pointed out these issues to them when they came to me with some personnel concerns over this particular individual. And that's how we started down the process. But I just, this podcast is to talk about one of the things I really believe deeply, and that is that most people do not need surprise, shame-based leadership. I personally do not believe in blindsided firing culture. I don't believe in performative corporate cruelty. And I also don't believe in enabling dysfunction forever because it's more comfortable and we're uncomfortable having those hard conversations. This for me is where my go or grow framework and methodology comes in to help businesses. And 100% no, this is not fluffy HR. It's just honest leadership. It's clarity, it's authenticity, it is transparency with employees. People need to know when they're not performing to expectations, and people also need to know what those expectations are. And often I do see, and this was part of the issue at this company, expectations were not clearly outlined and they were consistently changing. And that is really hard for an employee to perform. It was a bad fit, honestly. But when I talk about my grow or go process, we infuse clarity, accountability, communication, documentation, support, and really honest conversations about fit. And we just stop dancing around the truth. That's something that I am good at. I think it really scares a lot of people in romantic relationships with me, but that's a whole separate conversation, right? But the right fit, it doesn't scare off. That's the other thing, right? The right romantic relationship for me that feedback loop is a beautiful, beautiful situation. So if I were to teach you how to do this in your business, I would say over about 6 weeks, you would start having really direct conversations. And that's what I did with this particular employee. They were not cruel. They were not emotionally loaded, though they became emotional often. And they were not passive aggressive, but they were very honest. That's what leadership requires. But it is hard for business owners and top managers to do everything operationally and do this. That's why I love to go into businesses and help because where expectations are not being met, where trust is breaking down, where communication is struggling, that's where we need to see improvement. And that's what support looks like if you want to help somebody grow into using the grow or go model, right? Because what I see that's really fascinating happen when we use this methodology is that conversations become more honest. And they did in this instance. And the employee himself started realizing that he didn't actually fit in the role and it wasn't actually a good fit for him anymore either. And that's where the beauty was. That moment when he was able to say that, and I was able to help guide him to see that he was somebody who needed a specific box of expectations to work in and a specific box of things to check off the list. And that is really hard to offer an employee in a small company when they are expected to wear a lot of hats and be a lot of roles. It's hard. And that means it's not a good fit. He was somebody who would have been a great fit in an engineering company that had a boxy approach to expectations and employee reviews. Meet these guidelines and you get a 5% raise every year, right? What's important with this thought is that not every resignation is failure. I really and truly believe sometimes it's oxygen. Sometimes people are acting out because they are misaligned, overwhelmed, underqualified, overpositioned, or deeply unhappy. And often they have something going on personally that's making all of these things go awry in the workplace. And when leaders avoid honest conversation, everyone just suffers longer. I see that so often that leaders avoid these honest conversations because they're hard. It's funny because I always think, well, why would they be hard? They're my favorite thing to do. But that's probably why I have a business that does this. So now here's the wild part about this individual. Once he resigned, it was like oxygen poured back into the business. The entire team stepped up, communication improved, people became more collaborative, right? And the emotional heaviness lifted. And let me tell you about the money. He was making a lot of money, and they didn't end up needing to replace him fully, right? We were able to disperse some of that money, give people some raises, and actually shift some other roles around, which was really fun as well. And, the business owner, the founder realized how much energy had been going toward managing this one particularly unhealthy dynamic. So that's the thing about energy leaks. We often just don't realize how much oxygen we're losing until that leak is repaired. And now you can think about this also if you don't have a lot of employees, you can think about this with the business relationships you have, with any level of support that you do have. Is it harder to manage the relationship than what the outcome is? And could there be some energy leaks? In my business, I'll be honest, one of the reasons I became so completely obsessed and passionate about the concept of hiring chief energy officers in, a business of my size, where I would call myself really a solopreneur with a team now. So I'm still an entrepreneur, right? but originally started as a solopreneur. And when we build a team of people, this concept of chief energy officers really comes in because the best support people don't just manage tasks, they help protect oxygen in the business. And that's why I have a chief energy officer in my business, because they are trained based on the framework that I created. They notice operational friction, leadership bottlenecks, emotional overwhelm in teams. They're kind of like your OMBs, right? They notice communication breakdowns, invisible labor, and the energy leaks leaders are just too close to actually see. So here's the truth bomb. Sometimes the answer is hiring, sometimes the answer is systems, and sometimes the answer is boundaries. And even sometimes the answer is finally having the conversations that everyone has been avoiding. I just want to let you know I do have and offer grow or go strategy days. No, they're not full days. They're a couple hours. I meet with the leaders of the business or the owner of the business, and we just do a little strategic leadership session where I dive into the business. I talk about team dynamics, delegation breakdowns, leadership bottlenecks, hiring needs, operational overwhelm, and the hidden energy leaks that keep your business stuck. And sometimes, if we give people feedback, they grow, they don't go, but it does pour oxygen back, because success without oxygen is honestly just burnout with better branding. So if you are interested, you could find more information at rockconsulting.com, and we'll also link everything here in the show notes. So before you go, I want you to take a deep breath. Wow, did I take a lot of deep breaths today while we were facing this arm fracture situation? But I want you to ask yourself, where in my business have I normalized dysfunction? Or you can offer the question to yourself of, where in my life have I normalized dysfunction and chaos? Ask yourself, what relationship, role, task, or dynamic keeps making me feel emotionally heavy, smaller, or constantly exhausted? And what would happen if I stopped managing that chaos and started restoring oxygen instead? Go for a walk, take a shower, or sit and journal and think about those questions, because I think they'll really help you in your business and in your life. Until next time, I'll see you on the Power of Oxygen first. I'll give you a little arm fracture update, and we will keep moving forward. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and I can't wait to hear from you soon. This conversation reminded you that you don't have to do it all alone. That's your cue. Go download the free Support and Breathe Return on Investment Calculator at rockconsulting.com. It's a quick, slightly eye-opening way to see how much time, money, and energy you could reclaim with the right support. And remember, support does not always mean hiring. Sometimes it's a simple ask. Sometimes it's a boundary. And sometimes it's finally letting someone be your peanut butter. If something in this episode resonated, please come tell me. I'm on Instagram at @_rock_, and I genuinely love hearing what lands for you so I can create more of them. And remember, your energy is your greatest asset. Protect it, invest in it, and always put on your oxygen mask first. I'll see you next week.